Hi, this is Steve Dale, and I want to thank the folks that are on tonight. And this is going to be our part 2 of a part 3 series on supported decision making here by Suzanne Francisco. And for those of you who haven't heard part 1, that is up on our YouTube channel, which is YouTube /c/achievingindependence.com. Okay, so anyway, with this, I know we have a lot to cover tonight. I'm going to be monitoring questions as best I can. So as we go through this, if you would type your questions either in the chat box or the question box, we'll get to that probably mostly at the end of the presentation. So Suzanne, with that, what can you tell us about supported decision making?
Well, first of all, I really want to thank you for all the work that you do and with your Achieving Independence website. I really appreciate you having me here today. And as Steve said, this is the second in a three-part series webinar on supported decision making, and today it's about healthcare and life planning. And so if you missed the first webinar, I really encourage you to go take a look at it. We covered some really important points that would be a good foundation for tonight's webinar. And I'm going to weave in some personal stories that you may have heard a little bit about on the last webinar. And I want to let you know my journey and how I got into supported decision making. And so I grew up with a sister who was a really strong self-advocate. She was a juvenile diabetic, and later we found out she was also bipolar. And she became very ill, and she eventually was placed in a group home after she became blind and lost a limb, and she was not conserved. And she was placed in a group home in the last bed, in the last hallway, literally. It just felt like the spot where she was very rarely visited. And she was, as I said, a very strong advocate, and I was also helping her. And eventually she was able to get out of that group home, but it was very difficult. And she passed living independently with the supports that she needed at age 43. And she was able to go to the hospital and volunteer and speak to young girls and boys who were becoming juvenile diabetics and talk to them about her experience. And so it was really empowering and important for her to have those choices in her life, and they were absolutely the foundation of why I am speaking to you today. And then further on in my journey, I had 3 children who turned out to have special needs. And so I learned a lot in my experience with my sister, and I might add with my mother. My mother was incredible with my sister, so I learned from her as well. But it turned out that my children had a rare form of congenital muscular dystrophy, and we found out when Kylie was about 15 and a half, finally, that they are number 8, 9, and 10 in the world. So they have a very rare form, and they also have autism comorbid. And so they are nonverbal. They present with some sensory issues and disorder and some behavioral challenges. They're also very strong-willed teenagers, like every other teenager. But since they're number 8, 9, 10 in the world, my girlfriend, who also has a child with special needs, said that I hit the jackpot. Ding, ding, ding. I won the lottery. So I think that's absolutely true, that I'm blessed, that it's challenging, and I'm blessed that I get to help others today and learn everything that I've learned. And so basically at some point I became a special education advocate and work with clients from age 3 to 22, ranging in many different diagnoses and disabilities, and help them get the supports and services they need in schools. And then at some point I had the pleasure of attending a session by Jonathan Martinez, and he was talking about supported decision making. And since that time, and supported decision making is an alternative to conservatorship here in California. In the rest of the United States, they call it guardianship. And so since then, I've been basically working with him to do outreach throughout the state of California and educate people that there are options other than conservatorship, which for most of us parents, we really haven't had other information that there is any other choice other than to conserve your child. And it really should be the last choice rather than the first choice on a continuum of options. And so what I've learned really and what I believe in is that every human has the fundamental right to make choices through self-expression and the right to learn how to express themselves, and that they can express themselves according to every single person's unique abilities. And so I wanted to talk to you about the UN's Declaration of Human Rights. I had the great pleasure of being at the ARC Public Policy Conference a little more than a week ago, and got the pleasure of listening to Stephen Dale speak, and also to Sue Swenson, who did a keynote. And I love what she shared. She shared that the principles that every culture in the world agrees on are included in the universal human rights. And she said, I thought human rights were something you gave to other people. And that what she discovered in her work with people with disabilities is that it's all about human rights. So we want to meet them where they are. I'll be brief. I discussed presumed competence in my last webinar, and really comes from a personal story with my son, who was, had been what some might consider most challenging of my 3 children. And I would walk around asking all these questions and sit on the bed next to him and talk. And one day I was asking a question and he shook his head yes, and I was just stunned. And for those of you who were in my last webinar, again, I told this story, but I think it's an important thing to hear. And that is that I really assumed that my son did not understand what I was talking about a lot of the time. And so I asked this question and he shook his head yes for the first time. And so I thought, no, he can't understand me. And I asked it in many different ways, thinking he's just shaking his head. He learned to shake his head. But he absolutely understood what I was saying. And that is a perfect example of myself and presumed incompetence, and presuming that I knew what it is that he thinks and what he wants and what he can comprehend. And so we really need to presume competence until we're shown otherwise. And we want to look at the level of abilities of each person. And so many times what a person cannot do is focused on. And we really want to focus on what can they do right now. What can they do now? What decisions are they making now? And that is, what choices are they making now? And what can they do with support? And so we want to think outside of the box. And I am lucky enough every day as a special education advocate to be creative and be solution oriented and look for possibilities and thinking in new ways every day. And it's a challenge, and it's an honor and a privilege to think differently every day. So that's what I ask each of you to do as a person with 3 children with disabilities, to be open to possibilities and new thinking. I talked about this a little bit in the last webinar as well, about teaching problem-solving skills, and that decision-making skills are built over time. So even if someone isn't exhibiting those skills now, that doesn't mean we should stop teaching them, and that they can't build those skills to the best of their abilities over time. So we always want to be teaching, and that can be at age 2. Any decision that you're making for your child that they might be able to make for themselves. So everyone benefits through the ability to make choices. And of course, we focus a lot on autonomy and supported decision making, and this is a very intensely personal journey. Supported decision making. It's based on unique abilities unique challenges, individual preferences, and that person's unique opportunities in life. So the Article of Faith, the Americans with Disabilities Act, says physical or mental disabilities in no way diminish a person's right to fully participate in all aspects of society. And so that can look different for every person. That doesn't mean that every person doesn't have the opportunity to participate. And yet, people with disabilities have more medical conditions, yet more often poorly diagnosed and over or under treated, according to the Office of Surgeon General. Maybe that's because in a recent survey, 10% of people under guardianship or who sought guardianship for someone identified a medical professional as the person who first recommended it. So 10% of people found out about guardianship through a medical professional. And it's also quite common, actually, that parents find out about guardianship through the local education agency, even though that is not necessarily a place that you should be finding out about guardianship. So why supported decision-making? It is endorsed by the U.S. Department on Health and Human Services. It's endorsed by the American Bar Association. They have published a tool that's literally called the Practical Tool that helps attorneys assess whether guardianship is appropriate or if there are ways that they can practice supported decision-making with their clients. The National Guardianship Association recommends that alternatives, including supported decision-making, are identified and considered prior to considering guardianship. ASAN, the Autism Self-Advocacy Network, the ARC, who advocates for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, as well as the National Association for Mental Illness, all endorse supported decision-making. So why self-determination? People with more self-determination have improved psychological health, including better adjustment to increased care needs. They have a better quality of life, more employment and community integration. They have increased health, welfare, and safety. And as I covered in the last webinar, people without self-determination often feel hopeless, helpless. They may suffer from low self-esteem. And people with self-determination have proven to be less likely to be abused, to have more friends, and to have paid jobs and be more independent in their lives. So the current situation is that only 1/2 or fewer of over 8,100 people reviewed were exercising choices about home, work, goals, or services in a way that was meaningful to them. And that is really key to supported decision-making, is how is it meaningful to them? So what is meaningful to them? How do we know what is meaningful to them? How can they practice expressing that in the decisions that they make? So a key concept is informed consent. And like capacity, it is to guardianship the linchpin of self-determination in medical care. And there are 3 parts: information to the person, understanding by the person, and choice by the person. As with every decision, assistance can be provided to help the individual make medical decisions. For example, you may have heard this said many times, please explain that to me in English. And so the ability to make decisions is a continuum, and a person may be able to make some decisions but not others. As I said, decision-making skills are built over time, and the capacity to consent to surgery is obviously not the same as the capacity to perform surgery. And you and I both know that through our own experience, that the doctor says sign here, and we trust the doctor who is supporting us and helping us to make the right decisions. Therefore, there is a need to empower and enable informed consent in ways that are flexible immediate, improve doctor-patient communication and collaboration, and increase the role of family, friends, and people close to the patient. So that sounds like supported decision-making, which by definition is people working with friends, family members, and professionals to help them understand the situations and choices they face so they can make their own decisions. The solutions are also different for each person. Some people may need one-to-one support and discussion about the issue, where others may need a team approach. Many people, like my children, may need things explained pictorially, visually, and really with supported decision-making, the possibilities are endless because, as I said, it's very individualized. Just as there is never one IEP, individual education plan, for one student, there is never a supported decision-making agreement or process that is the same for each person. So we are not alone. With supported decision-making, the reality for me now, as a person practicing supported decision-making with my children and in my advocacy, there is a clear circle of support around the individual along with their family and friends to help execute a cohesive plan. So I feel, and people practicing supported decision-making who are the supporters of the individual and the individual themselves are no longer alone. And so many times that is how we feel as parents. We are given this mammoth blessing and opportunity to tackle, and often we are alone. And we're thinking about, what's going to happen later on in life. And when you have a supported decision-making team, there is a united single purpose that we're all honoring the unique abilities that allow for self-expression, maximum independence, and personal fulfillment for every exceptional individual. And for me, that has really brought me peace of mind because when I pass, I feel self-assured that there has been a team of people who know my child, who honor, who's going to honor their wishes and their decisions to the maximum of their abilities. And really, it's a support for everyone in the individual's life. So forms, it's as easy as adding language like and for decision-making purposes to the HIPAA release, or you can make your own form. There are model forms. So if you go to www.supporteddecisionmaking.org, there are many forms and models there from all around the country, and that is the National Resource Center for Supported Decision-Making. And there is just a huge resource library. There are videos, supported decision-making agreements, and there will be a resource list that's included here at the end of this webinar. And so powers of attorney with supported decision-making. So a power of attorney gives someone, you choose the power to act in your place. So you're giving an agent decision-making authority. And I love the language here. So you can have something that says, it is my and my agent's intent that we will work together to implement this power of attorney. That means I should retain as much control over my life and make my own decisions with my agent's support to the maximum of my abilities. I am giving my agent the power to make certain decisions on my behalf, but my agent agrees to give primary consideration to my expressed wishes in a way she makes those decisions. And so you can have different areas included and the abilities for each person personalized. And there are several different kinds of powers of attorneys. I am a non-attorney, by the way. I consulted an attorney in creating this webinar, but I am a non-attorney. There are different kinds of powers of attorney that are available. And so, get to my next slide here. Medical advanced directives with supported decision making. Here is a similar example language. My agent will work with me to make decisions and give me the support I need and want to make my own healthcare decisions. This means my agent will help me understand the situations I face and the decisions I have to make. Therefore, at times when my agent does not have full power to make healthcare decisions for me, my agent will provide support to make sure I am able to make healthcare decisions to the maximum of my ability, with me being the final decision maker. So the medical advance directive is like a living will and actions that can be taken if somebody is no longer able to make decisions. So this is saying when the agent does not have full power and I still can make some decisions, this is a supported decision-making language that could be effective. Person-centered planning. So person-centered plans are all about individual preferences and goals. And it's going to include information related to community participation, employment, income and savings, healthcare, and wellness. And the person-centered plan is included in the IPP, which you would have through the regional center. So person-centered planning often includes a myriad of tools. If you've ever gone to a course for certification, they have many different visual tools often to help facilitate the process. They really stress the importance of the individual being listened to, and they talk about what's important to the person and what's important for the person, where that person is now and where they want to be. So they'll look at what needs to change and what needs to stay the same. And in the state of California, there is a program called the Self-Determination Program that is in very much a state of limbo. We're waiting for action by the feds, and it's pretty much on hold. So we're waiting for further movement, and right now we're not sure how long that will be. But there will be a pilot program in the state of California with 2,500 people. And so there are a certain number allotted to each regional center, and you can sign up to be on that list to be picked as one of the random people included in this pilot program. After the pilot program is finished, it will open up to the state of California. And unfortunately, all of that is in a bit of a limbo, but it does look like it will be happening in the future. And I mention that because in working with regional centers and the State Council for Developmental Disabilities on the Self-Determination Program, we find it's really important to be clear about whether you're going to be using supported decision-making before you begin the process. And in the process, with or without the self-determination program, you want to be clear about supported decision-making before you begin the person-centered plan and before you get to the IPP, because person-centered planning is very much akin to supported decision-making, but as you can see, what is important to the person and what is important for the person. So that's the difference. If someone is considering the person's interest and listening to them, but is now deciding, well, it might be more important for this person to do this, even though this is what is important to them. So it's very important to be clear about supported decision-making as much as possible before the person-centered planning process. So that sounds like supported decision-making. And in assessing supported decision-making through Medicaid, there is a program called Early Periodic Screening Diagnosis Treatment, or EPSDT. And the basic of that is that it's designed to identify and treat problems early before they worsen. They are for individuals under the age of 21, for anyone under the Medicaid waiver, but it is included in California as a Medi-Cal benefit. So for anybody who has full scope eligibility of Medi-Cal, could access these services. And basically, there are periodic screenings to determine healthcare needs, and the services provided under EPSDT are based on the healthcare needs that have been determined. So in practice, what it covers is anything that you could conceivably be covered by Medicaid, whether or not California covers it, could be included. So some state could cover it to fix a medical problem, help it, or keep it from getting worse. California must cover it under EPSDT. So an example is given here. In Virginia, they do not cover dental care under Medicaid, but other states do. So in Virginia, like California, dental is covered under Medi-Cal. In Virginia, they must cover dental care in EPSDT because it is included in other states. So self-determination, again, if a child's disability causes him or her to have a difficulty making decisions, EPSDT must cover supports and services to help the child overcome this. So this is especially true if they're unable to take care of him or herself in a manner that society believes is appropriate. So any services that would help the individual to be independent. So there is a coordination opportunity here that most people don't know about, and that is special education and EPSDT. So a lot of parents may have seen a checkbox on the IEP that talks about, does your child have a Medicaid waiver? And the school is a Medicaid provider. So any medical services and supports in an IEP are covered by Medicaid, and the school would basically be the Medicaid provider that could implement the EPSDT services, or they could contract out for those, and that can be written into an IEP. So planning throughout the life course, supported decision making can work in a number of contexts to help somebody exercise their right to make choices. So one example of that is financial authority, and this is an example of actual language that was included in a power of attorney. So I will not buy, sell, manage, or otherwise take or exercise any interest in any tangible property or item costing or worth more than X amount of dollars without my agent's agreement. For example, if you want to buy or sell a car for $20,000, I would need my agent to agree, or I would need my agent to agree, or the sale could not go through. So in making decisions whether or not to buy, sell, manage, or otherwise take or exercise any interest in tangible property or item costing or worth more than X amount of dollars, my agent and I will discuss the situation and give consideration to my express wishes before my agent decides whether or not to agree. And we also have an example for banking. Here this says, I agree that my agent will be listed as a joint account holder on all bank or financial institution accounts, including checking and savings, as well as credit and debit cards that I have or open while this power of attorney is in effect. I agree that I will not withdraw more than X amount of dollars from my account, write a check for more than X amount of dollars, otherwise cause more than X amount of dollars to be withdrawn. In making decisions whether or not to agree to write checks, withdraw money from my accounts, or charge money to accounts, my agent and I will discuss the situation and give consideration to my express wishes before my agent decides whether or not to agree. And again, there can be powers of attorney where the person is unable to make financial decisions, and that can be true, and maybe they can make other decisions. But there are many people who can make financial decisions, and this is an example of how that can be built in.
So, Sue, can I ask you a question here?
Yes.
Now, that makes a whole lot of sense to me. Now, I'm assuming in that power of attorney, because there's many people that have capacity, but that doesn't mean you can't have a stroke or something and have something that or you lose the capacity. So I'm assuming that the power of attorney would have something that would change that if the person did lose capacity or not.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for adding that. Yes.
Okay, because
Yes.
it would seem like just because you got one disability doesn't mean that something else bad can't happen to you.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah,
Thank
I
you.
mean, in all fairness, it should be that way, but that's not how it works. Okay, I just wanted to clarify that.
Thank you.
Okay, there we go.
And then, so what does all that add up to? People with disabilities cannot have a decent quality of life with limited financial resources and modest government support. This is what so many people are faced with. And when you receive public benefits, to live independently, many people rely on public benefits like Medicaid, SSI, SSDI, and to qualify, you generally may not have more than $2,000 of countable assets. Earnings of more than the substantial gainful activity or SGA level can also affect eligibility for these programs. And I just have to say that Stephen very much knows what he's talking about, and I really want to thank you because he gave a session at the ARC conference, and I appreciate your contribution. So also families who provide financial or in-kind support, the person may be disqualified or have benefits reduced. So how can people with disabilities save money for their needs or for retirement? Because of the means test, people with disabilities fear working because if they take too much, they can lose the benefits. If they're discouraged, families are discouraged supporting for fear that their individual could lose benefits, and they're encouraged to spend down assets because they're afraid they will lose benefits. And so often they can't afford housing, and they must live in dangerous or substandard conditions. And so we are lucky that we now have the Achieving a Better Life Experience Act, the ABLE Act, and Stephen is very knowledgeable in this area. So we were lucky enough to hear from him and also from John Ariel at the ARC conference, even more in depth than you'll hear from me today. So what it is, it's like a 529 account for education where family and friends can contribute up to $14,000 per year into an ABLE account. Money can be withdrawn tax-free to pay for housing, transportation, healthcare, and other expenses. And the money in the ABLE account does not affect eligibility for Social Security or Medicaid. If there is more than $100,000 in the account, then the SSI benefits will be suspended, but you will still receive Medicaid. And in that suspension, that means you do not have to reapply for SSI. It will just be suspended. And I know the process can be painstaking to reapply for SSI, so that's very good news. So a maximum of $14,000 per year and $100,000. Once you get past $100,000, your SSI would be suspended. So eligibility for an ABLE account can be established for or by an individual with a disability, including an individual eligible for SSI or SSDI due to blindness or their disability, an individual who would be eligible under the disability criteria for SSI, even if she has not been found to be eligible, even if he or she would not be eligible due to income. So establishing eligibility is designed to be done by filling out a tax form with a doctor's certification saying that the person has a disability that would make them eligible for SSI or SSDI. And states can set up their own ABLE accounts, but you don't have to live in that state to open an account. Here in California, we can find out about it on the Cal ABLE website that is listed here. And Ohio is known to have a very good ABLE account that you can take a look at stableaccount.com. So specifically, the ABLE account can be used for basic living expenses. So this is an extensive myriad plethora of choices that could be qualified as basic living expenses. So some examples that are here are education, tutors, special education services, housing modifications, personal assistance supports for employment, respite care could fall under health, modifications to vehicles even, or other transportation expenses, and other life necessities could be personal assistance supports, expenses for oversight monitoring, or advocacy. And there are plenty of other examples here that could be considered basic living expenses. And so the ABLE account really is a path out of poverty. The ABLE account comes education, comes employment, training, and support, transportation, assistive technology, which enables a job, which enables earned income, which can go into the ABLE account. So it's quite an empowering pathway that we are able to use now to empower people with disabilities. So before we had the ABLE account, we had special needs trusts. And like the ABLE account, people could set aside funds for an individual with disabilities. But unlike the ABLE account, the money in a special needs trust is taxable. And basically anything could be included in the special needs trust funds that could not be paid for through Medicaid. If it's not being paid for through Medicaid, then you can use special needs trust funds for it. Special needs trusts can be expensive, and not all states have the same options. So in a special needs trust, the trustee decides how the money is spent, whereas in an ABLE account with self-determination, the person decides, the person with disabilities decides how the money is spent. And of course, you can have a support person that helps you, who's on your supported decision-making team in making those decisions. So the whole point and the purpose of the ABLE Act is supporting individuals with disabilities to maintain health, independence, and quality of life. So making it achievable. If we have increased self-determination, we have improved health, we have increased independence, we have better quality of life. Therefore, ABLE accounts should obviously increase self-determination. And that sounds like a good job for supported decision-making. So people with disabilities can use friends, family members, and professionals to help them understand the situations and choices they face so they can make their own decisions related to their ABLE account and in other situations. So another example would be end-of-life planning. So in the conversation at the 5 wishes, this is a facilitated process where the person makes decisions about hospice, palliative care, and services. And there is some sample language here called the growth clause. My agent and I will review this power of attorney or advanced directed plan to see if it should be changed or canceled at least every so much time that is specified here. However, unless my agent and I change the power of attorney, I cancel it, my agent resigns, or either I or the agent dies, the power of attorney will continue. And I do want to say, in my sister's case, my sister wanted to donate her body to science, and that was a really hard thing for my mother to accept. And it was her life's wish, her entire life, to donate her body to science. And I had the pleasure of honoring her wish. And it was pretty difficult because she didn't set it up ahead of time. and while she was on hospice, we were able to make that happen. And her body went to science and went to Washington State University and was studied on the effects of diabetes and what could be done for future people with diabetes. And I know that was so important to my sister, and that's why these things need to be considered. And I think my mother is very proud that that happened, and that was a very hard thing for her at the time, which is very understandable. So, elephant in the room, safety. If it's not guardianship, supported decision making is, there's no guarantee of 100% safety. However, supported decision making increased self-determination, which is correlated with increased safety. So the point is here, whether or not you are conserved or whether or not you are practicing supported decision making, there is no 100% guarantee, even in a guardianship, that a person would be safe. And there has never been a study conducted that includes guardianship that proves that it is safer for individuals. So often that decision can be made based in fear, which is something to be considered. But again, even if a child or an individual is conserved, that piece of paper isn't necessarily going to make that person safe. However, it is something that we always have to consider. So we want to pay attention to the signs and signals that somebody might be being abused, and ways that you might see that is through injuries, through unusual bruising or abrasions, fear or nervousness on the part of the individual, or any kind of withdrawal. And all of us, of course, always want to help empower a person to be safe. And if you see any of these things, we want to make sure that you can report it to APS or to the police. And so there are other signs and signals of exploitation that we can look for, and also in signs and signals of caregiver neglect, the caregiver not seeking resources or help or assistance that the person may need, a caregiver being dismissive. And so these are things that are obvious that we look for, and signs of self-neglect that we can take a look at as well. But we want to remember that adults are allowed to make bad decisions, and that we need to be very careful that all of us make decisions related to health, related to money, love, and living conditions that are not always the best decisions. And so part of the process for every individual is to learn and make mistakes. And so often we don't give the person with disabilities, who is surrounded by a circle of support of people that they've chosen to support them, to make mistakes and learn from their mistakes. And that is how each of us in life grows. So we just want to make sure that we're not judging on the best possible choices, like if they stop eating ice cream, for instance. How often have we woke up at 2 o'clock in the morning and have ice cream when that's really maybe not the best decision for us at the time, but it's the decision that we're going to make today. So community inclusion. You don't, I wanted to come back to Sue Swenson, who spoke at the ARC of California Public Policy Conference. And this was also included in her keynote. And it was just really touching. One of the people that was at the conference said the next day that what she said was a food for the soul. And that's exactly how I felt. She spoke about her son, Charlie. And Charlie passed away at the age of 30. But she advocated for him and believed in supportive decision making, and part of her keynote, she said, "You don't understand Charlie enough to take him out to lunch, but you're deciding his rights." And that supported decision making is about so much more than rights. It's about inclusion. And she spoke of the caregiver that he had for 14 years, that took him to work for 14 years. And she told him that his job was to help him rebel against her and to teach him independence and to get him connected in the community. And really, for any parent of a person with a disability or without a disability, that is commendable, and that's exactly how we teach people to be independent, is to try and encourage them to make as many decisions as they can. And the caregiver was really supported to do that. And the caregiver of Charlie, Sue Swenson's son, took him to work, went together for 14 years. And what seemed poignant to me was that he shared that they worked together, the caregiver and Charlie worked together to integrate the community, and how much the community around them learned from his ability to go to work and to participate in society and in the community and decisions. So I want to come back to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the fact that we are all human beings. So we, the people with disabilities and their supporters, we who are listening today and who are going to go out into the world tomorrow, can teach the community and society through the Human Rights Declaration. And that is that all people with disabilities and without disabilities are human beings. They are born free and equal in dignity and rights. They have the right to life, liberty, and the security of person. They should not be subjected to degrading treatment. They have the right to the recognition everywhere as a person before the law. And unfortunately, so often people with disabilities are overlooked and they are treated as a non-person. And we need to remember it's our job to educate people every day and to remember every moment, how can we empower this person to be independent and to reach and to listen to them. And under the Human Rights Declaration, every person is entitled, without any discrimination, to equal protection under the law against any discrimination. We have the right to the freedom of opinion and expression and the standard of living adequate for health and well-being of himself and of his family. There is a right to education. They have a right to freely participate in the cultural life of the community, to work, to the free choice of employment without any discrimination, and to equal pay for equal work. And I do have to say that this is under the UN Universal Declaration of Human Rights that we're looking at now. And so that also includes the right to an existence worthy of human dignity. So we, the people with disabilities and their supporters, truly teach society and our community by living the Universal Declaration of Human Rights every day. And this is something that Sue Swenson reminded us at the art conference that I really wanted to bring to each and every one of us. And she encouraged everyone to have this on your phone. There's an app for this, and to remember this every day. And unfortunately, the United States is one of 2 countries that have not ratified this Declaration of Human Rights. And yet, it is something that every culture agrees is a human right. In writing it, they addressed every culture and what they thought would be agreeable in every country. So we always need to remember that supported decision-making only works if we recognize, respect, and protect everyone's right to make choices based on their own unique ability. And I wanted to include, I'm not sure how we're doing on time here, but I wanted to include resources that you can access for supported healthcare decision making. You can go to the Office of Developmental Primary Care, which is on the UCSF website. There's a lot of good information there, as there is on the National Resource Center for Supported Decision Making website as well. There are videos available here and on the other website as well. And then ASAN, Autism Self-Advocacy Network, has a toolkit available for healthcare and the transition to adulthood. Also on the UCSF website is a transition guide that it contributed to that also includes information about transition in general and to supported healthcare decision making. And here is more information about the Cal-ABLE Act, the website, and other ways that you can connect on Facebook, Twitter, and on YouTube. And for those people who were not able to attend the last webinar, I wanted to make sure to include these resources. So there's information from Jonathan Martinez, who has won several cases related to supported decision making, and he speaks around the country. And also, I thank him for his contribution in presenting this webinar. And there's information basically where you can look and view these videos that are created by doctors. They're created by people who are practicing healthcare supported decision making or supported decision making in their life in general. And I think it's very powerful to hear directly from professionals and from supporters and from individuals. So these are really useful resources. Also, there is one here from Delaware, and supported decision making is legal in the state of Texas and in Delaware. There is information here from the Justice for Jenny case, which was the first case decided for supported decision making, and the Ryan King case, which was very recent in 2016. In Vermont, there is a pilot program, which we will talk a little bit more about in the next webinar, that's around creating a culture of coordinated support, and that is really about interagency collaboration between vocational rehabilitation, the Department of Special Education, and through agencies, the developmental disability agencies that handle IPPs, and the law that is already in place in all those areas to create collaboration and to save those agencies time and money, and to really empower people to practice supported decision making and have the communication of how those supports and services are enabling them to be independent in their lives. And this ACLU brainstorming guide is very, very useful. It has supported decision making agreements that you can use to share with the school. There are sample agreements to share in finance, sample plain language HIPAA agreements, and so these agreements can be attached to binding legal contracts, which we discussed in the previous webinar. And they are specifically, they have been written by attorneys, and they're specifically written in plain language, not in a complicated manner, so that it's easier for a person with disabilities to understand. And there is some more resources here. This includes the practical toolkit that you can get on the supported decision-making website that attorneys can use. In Washington, D.C., they're implementing supported decision-making as early as preschool, and there are model agreements to help see how we can be doing that, which we absolutely can be doing that for our children here by creating goals related to self-determination and self-advocacy. And there are other tools related to person-centered planning that are very useful to implement. And so the next webinar will include information more related to these two tools that are available. One is a paper I wrote with Jonathan Martinez that talks about setting the wheels in motion and creating supported decision-making teams. And also the transition guide by Melissa Chris Cooper. I was a contributing author, and it's a very personal perspective from an individual with cerebral palsy and her journey and everything that she's learned as an individual and as a professional. And I believe she's on the board of the Special Hope Foundation as a self-advocate at this time. And so we really hope that you join us for the next Supported Decision-Making webinar, which will be through the Dale Law Firm on May 3rd. And we'll be talking about the hows, the whos, and the whats that individuals and families need to consider in creating supported decision-making teams. And so often we go, great, I really believe in this supported decision-making. I want to implement this. And then we go, what do we do? How do we start? Where do we go? And so this will really help talk about that and how important data can be for some people with intellectual disabilities and using visuals and video and how to pick team members. So we hope you will join us, and I really want to thank Stephen Dale and the Dale Law Firm for all their help and making this possible for people to have more information, and KPS for Parents, which is the nonprofit organization that I work with. It's Knowledge Power Solutions for Parents. And of course, special thanks to the National Resource Center for Supported Decision Making for all their help in providing the resources and making this possible. And we just want to remember that everybody has the right to make choices. And this is my email address for anybody who would like to join the conversation and contact me or ask for any kind of further information that is not available here today. So I'll turn it over to Stephen Dale. And
Ellen's going to go through the questions here in a minute. She had a pretty busy evening here transporting Jeremy, but apparently Jeremy's probably safe, or else she wouldn't be here. Hey, one of the things that did come up before we go through this, and I think we may be covering this a bit in the next webinar, but as we had kind of gone through that supported decision making isn't necessarily for every person in every single situation, and I think and I know there's a couple questions that we'll go through about, the pros and cons of conservatorships versus supported decision-making. I will say that I've been following what's going on in Texas, and they actually have something in their statute. And this is the second year. The first year was a little bit on the rocky side. But on the other hand, what's come out of it is more discussion about trying to implement more supported decision-making in the whole process. But I know it takes a lot of training and a lot of resources and that kind of thing. And, part of this is we're kind of going through this is, for those of you that don't know this, I was actually a psych nurse and come from 3 generations of psych nurses. And I remember I was pretty good at manipulating my patients. In fact, I was an expert at it. And a lot of it was working with a lot of young men where basically a good psych nurse, or maybe a bad psych nurse if you think about it, can get their patients to say almost anything that they want. But that's not really letting the person express themselves. And I guess part of the concern is, I would think, is that part of good supported decision-making, especially with somebody who may have a hard time expressing themselves, is really going to rely a lot on the facilitator. And I can also just think of a lot of cases I've been involved in with, I bet, well-meaning caseworkers who absolutely will tell you they know what their client wants. And I just go back to remembering when I was a young nurse. Yeah, I knew exactly what my folks wanted. They wanted what I thought was best for them, and I don't think that's really what supported decision making is, right? I mean, coming back to this, it's only the facilitator is going to be a key part of this, right?
Absolutely. Well, in the next webinar, we will talk about how we pick somebody, and that it's somebody that we trust, that we feel would not have an agenda, that the agenda would be the individual. It would be someone that the individual picked. And to touch on what you said initially, there are times when unlimited conservatorship can be appropriate. And again, we covered some of this in the last webinar that we didn't talk about tonight. But the National Guardianship Association says, of course, we should consider supported decision-making first, and that basically there's a continuum of options, and all we've known about, it's similar to how it was previously for institutions, all we've really known about is guardianship and conservatorship. And now we know there are continuum of options, and we should start with alternatives and move to conservatorship if it's absolutely necessary. And supported decision-making can be built into a conservatorship. The issue with that is that there are 7 rights that can be taken away from an individual that is conserved, and it can be very difficult, even in the case of Ryan King, where the parents wanted the guardianship removed, and there was evidence that from people in his community and from his abilities that he could be removed, have the guardianship removed. And it was incredibly difficult, and it took many years. So it's really an important decision to make. And so we want to give pause and have people stop and say, what have we tried first? What have we done first before we jump to this conclusion? And so that's really the point that we want to make. I don't know if that...
And I'll just mention this one thing, and then I'm going to let Ellen do her job here.
Okay.
You mentioned a couple of times that the ARC of California had their 10th annual policy conference, which was a wonderful conference. And like everything else, I'm sure some people agreed with everything, some people didn't, but it's good to go through the policy. Sue Swenson's talk was very good. The other one, when we're looking at this, is also Tom Coleman's talk. Was also very informative, and I think here's the point, and many of us, hopefully, that are listening to this are advocates for, trying to find the least restrictive alternative. This is a new tool that really needs to be studied, and if Texas can make it work, for God's sake, we can make it work in California. On the other hand, I think for myself, as somebody who's worked in the field for quite a long time and feel fairly passionate about this, I think the other thing is there really needs to be a discussion about not only supported decision-making and that kind of thing, but also that we're not giving the resources to our courts to really oversee the conservatorships the way they really ought to be done. Because quite frankly, especially if we're dealing with folks with IDD, they are on the bottom of the list of what the courts are really focused on. They're really more focused on seniors being cheated and that kind of thing, which, by the way, as somebody over 65 now, I can understand where that's important. But on the other hand, the person with a loved one with Down syndrome or autism or whatever, they're on the bottom of the list in many cases of the court's focus. So, there's just so much to be done here, and there's a lot of dialogue that we need to, once again, not only make sure that we're using the least restrictive alternatives, but also making sure that our systems are following what's going on. So,
Yes.
it's a commentary here, but that's what I do. Ellen, you got any questions out there, kid? And by the way, how's Jeremy?
He's good.
Okay. And the dog's taking the night off too, huh?
All I do is drive him places, I swear.
Well, that's what we do with all children, right? So, okay, hit us with some questions here.
So the first question from Denise Piper, Steve, you kind of answered it already. Do you want me to read it or?
Well, let's go through this here, if that's okay. It's
Okay.
a fairly involved
Yeah.
question, and a lot of it deals with insurance issues, and and actually, I will tell you what the most effective group that I have found. Abby Corsell may send me a hate email in the morning for this. Is the National Health Education Law Project, and for those of you that can see the chat, it's www.healthlaw.org. I believe they have 3 offices. One is in Los Angeles, and Abby Corsell did a program for us on using private insurance. I will tell you, yeah.
Read the question here. I'll kind of paraphrase it a little bit if that's okay.
Sure.
But somebody is asking, her son has been, he's on an SSI waiver, but he also has private insurance, and they need to get him continued on their private insurance because not all because a couple of the services they use only take their private insurance. So they need to get him on as an disabled adult. And
right.
So the question is, I think, how they can go ahead and do that. Am I correct?
I think from the past webinars we've done, and since the question was so long, I'd ask the wrong question here. If it's autism, which is not what we're dealing with here,
This is
brain injury.
Schizophrenia.
Yeah.
Schizophrenia.
So yeah, for autism, you'd want to go to the Autism Insurance Project. Actually, for these kind of healthcare programs, the National Health Law or healthlaw.org has been great. I mean, Suzanne, do you have any input on this?
No. But I will tell you that I'm going to a symposium down south at the USC Gould School of Law at the Sachs Mental Health Institute, and there's going to be a supported decision-making symposium specifically focused on mental health. And I know Ellen Sachs herself has schizophrenia, so I'm really interested in learning more about that. I have information in terms of the HIPAA agreement, but I don't have anything additional to add in terms of being able to get him on the insurance. Clearly, he could write a supported decision-making language into the HIPAA agreement. Is there anything that you would add to that, Stephen?
No, I'll just mention that if you want to send your question to me, which is steve@dalelawfirm.com, I'll forward it to Abby, and also you might want to forward it to Suzanne as well for the conference she's going to. Okay?
Yes, I would love to give you further information, actually.
Okay.
We all learn from each other.
So Kathy Lindsay, she's from Nevada County, and I think she was asking how she signed up for the self-determining.
You would go through your regional center case manager. So if your individual is a person under the regional center and has an IPP, you would notify them, and you have to ask to have them put on the list. And so there's a certain number, like for instance, in Santa Clara County, for example, I believe there's only going to be 120 on the list for our county. So it's very randomly picked is what I understand. So unfortunately, it's a little delayed, but I can tell you that the Self-Determination Advisory Committee meetings are continuing, and the Self-Determination Program proposes there's an independent facilitator, and that is the person that helps the individual find supports and services, because there's no longer a case manager through the regional center. in the self-determination program. And it's very akin to me to a supported decision-making team. So I'm on the Independent Facilitator Advisory Committee meeting. So it is on hold, and you can tell your regional center to get on the list, but in no way are the rest of us stopping in terms of defining it further and working on it.
Okay. And then Kathy also said, seems like one of the reasons for conservatorship is vulnerability like love. How can you manage that with the client in a supportive decision-making team?
Like love, you said?
Like vulnerability. The biggest reason for a conservatorship, is protection.
Now, if what we're talking about is, I think this is one of the most misunderstood things with conservatorships. Let me interject this, and then we'll go back to the supported decision making. We get a fair amount of folks who want to. One of the 7 powers that you can ask for is the right to make social sexual decisions. Now, I've had maybe 3 cases out of hundreds where that actually mattered. So one of the things that often comes up is that parents will want to conserve their disabled loved one so they can stop them from having sex. If I could give you a piece of paper that could stop your daughter from having sex, I would have people lined up out the door. And just whether you agree with whether that's okay or not, it's one of the most worthless powers to ask for. Now, on the other hand, sexual vulnerability for a lot of these folks is very real. There's been a bill that has been defeated every year that to make it illegal, for instance, for caregivers of folks with IDD to have sex with their clients. And even attorneys aren't allowed to have sex with their clients. And, well, I wouldn't because my wife would kill me, but plus I'm too old. But be that as it may, that is one of the most hot button subjects. But I think I've seen a lot of folks attempt to conserve purely to try to control the sexuality of their disabled child, and it's one of the hardest things to deal with. And quite frankly, I don't have an effective way to stop people from having sex. And I tell you, as a residential care worker, these folks have sex. I'm just here to tell you. And it's one of those things that this is one of the what I would call third rail subjects of disability. Here, what would be a self-supported decision-making approach to this?
I have heard examples of, for instance, if somebody is going to meet somebody on a date and they need support, but they don't want somebody else to come with that, they could meet at a safe place and have somebody at a distance if they wanted that person there to advise them. And then there are also ways of teaching through different programs it's really about teaching decision-making skills and practicing that situation and contriving situations and teaching them. Whereas, it is true. You can conserve someone. You could have a piece of paper and not try and teach them any of those skills, and the same thing is going to happen. It would be safer with self-determination skills being taught. And what happens when we did this with my daughter. We had a situation where we contrived a situation. A really great guy that she knows, who's a therapist, came up to the house and said, "Hey, come on, Kylie, get in my car." And it was really great to learn that she said no. I thought she would just get in the car, and she didn't. But if she did, then we would know, we need to talk more about this, and of course we continue to. But there are programs, social programs that talk about circles of support and space and who are the people that you shake hands with, who are the people that you hug, and who are people who are your friends, who are people that are strangers. And so those are things that can be taught, that a piece of paper, you're right, very clearly in this case, that isn't necessarily going to protect the person. It's learning about these situations and being put in those or contriving those situations and learning what you can do. And everybody has different skill levels. So there's also plenty of people who have disabilities who have relationships, and rightfully so. So it's all based on the unique abilities. Yeah. There's a video out, actually.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, quite frankly, this is an area where it really deserves a lot more attention. And you know, part of being an attorney who does work in this area, I see the discomfort of a lot of the families I work with, and I understand it. But on the other hand, I would, you know, once again, I can give you only a couple of cases where the conservatorship dealing with limiting social sexual contacts had any effectiveness at all. And one that just really floored me, though, I will tell you, is there's a particular regional center, which I won't mention, GGRC, that opposes it in every single case here. And we had a case where a caregiver raped, as far as I'm concerned, the conservatee, and the parent who was the conservator wasn't told because she didn't have that power. Now, I don't think that's right, period. But, you know, what it comes to me is, down to me, is that this is an area that needs a lot more attention. But you know, once again, if you want to stop your, I'm sorry, it's not funny. If you want to stop your child from having sex, a conservatorship isn't going to do that. Unless they believe the paper will stop them from having sex. But once again, I had a client, we had to actually terminate the conservatorship proceeding because I just had to tell her the Concord Police Department is not going to stop your daughter from having sex, and I just, no piece of paper I can get you that's going to help with that. But if you get the piece of paper and your daughter believes it, that's, maybe, I don't know. Anyway, it's an area that really deserves a lot of attention, and I think sometimes parents need to look at these folks as adults, which I understand is difficult. And by the way, I have a very close family member who is extremely vulnerable, and it keeps me up at night. But we're not going to conserve her. Anyway, I'm sorry about that, but.
That's okay. I think it's a very important subject for everyone, and it's an important subject for me personally. I have a daughter, and that's why I began teaching her a lot of these things early on as much as possible. And I do know of Elizabeth Grigsby, who's I believe she's a GGRC case manager, and she's also a person with disabilities. And so there is a video on YouTube, and I'm sorry that I can't tell you the name of it, but it shows people with disabilities, including Elizabeth Grigsby, going out to work, people with Down syndrome, putting on a tie, having a drink, sitting down with a boyfriend, going out and living life. And so really, we need to look at looking again at the best decisions. What are the decisions that we disagree with? And what are the decisions that are really unsafe for that particular person? And so lots of parents disagree with things that their children do. And so it has to be very, very unique, and absolutely they are people. They're human beings like the rest of us, and they should have their abilities and their needs considered. So it is a very controversial thing, and it's very important to discuss and agree.
Okay, there are no more questions as far as I can see. So
Okay.
Thank you so much, Suzanne.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Okay, and we'll be sending out the slides, and also we'll send out the the links with it to the policy conference, and I would suggest that you there are a couple of the presentations that do deal with supported decision making that I think would also help along this line. And with
All
that,
right.
I want to thank you. And so in early May, we'll be doing the last of the series.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for attending today.